Hi, so today we're going to talk about nonfiction books. I actually don't read a lot of nonfiction books. There was a phase where all I read are nonfiction books, but that was just a phase which lasted for about a year and a half or two. But slowly, I've been getting back into reading nonfiction books, so I just wanted to do a recap of the nonfiction books that I've read so far, and I just wanted to document what I thought. I'm going to categorize these nonfiction books by topics or by their general subjects so we don't get confused. So, in other words, these are the nonfiction books that I recommend reading. Let's start with strategy because this is my favorite subject to read about when it comes to nonfiction books. So I'm going to talk about the very classic, which is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. This copy is the original text, but there are 1,000 of editions right now that has annotations, translations, and adaptations to a more modern society. So I really recommend those. The original book that I read was an annotated one, but this here is the original text. From the title itself, this is just a list of advice from a Chinese general about how to conduct war or how to win war, and this can be interpreted in the modern world in any scenario actually. So it's very useful, very insightful. The next book I actually don't have a physical copy of, but if you love this book, you'll definitely love the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, who is a samurai. This is him giving advice about his life as a samurai, the way of the sword. It's not just this physical thing, it's actually a way of life. The discipline necessary to practice the art of the sword, you can also apply in real life. This book is actually recommended by Robert Greene, who is one of my favorite nonfiction author, and he said that he's mentioned that a lot of businessmen actually refer to this book somehow, although when I read it, I can't really relate because, well, number one, I'm not really a businessman. Since I've already mentioned Robert Greene, he does not need any more introduction. Let's talk about him and his book. His first book and his most popular book, I think, is The 48 Laws of Power. This here is the concise edition. The original book is thick and big. This is probably I would say, a modernized version of The Art of War. And a lot of people don't like this book because they're saying it's manipulative, but it's a double-edged sword in my opinion. It could go both ways. You can definitely be the manipulator or the manipulated. It depends on how you interpret things, and that's the thing about reading. It's how you interpret the text and how you apply that in your life. So don't blame the book, don't blame the author. It's blame yourself. You can only blame yourself actually, like how your brain perceive things. Over here on my end, I really like this book because not only did it introduce me to like how things are in reality, but also it cautioned me how to interact with those harmful things and harmful people and manipulative people. So to me, it's a good book. It's not really manipulating me into being evil or whatever. So moving on to the next subject is financial. I don't really read a lot of financial books, but I've read a few. Two really stood out to me. This is the first one. It's Rich Dad's Increase Your Financial IQ, Get Smarter with Your Money by Robert T. Kiyosaki. I've read his Rich Dad Poor Dad in college. It was recommended by a business professor. I also really liked that, but I did not include it in this video because I don't know, I feel like I've read it so long ago that I've read better books. But this one really teaches you about how to handle money, but also if you're a businessman, if you're starting to get into business, this will open your mind. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to people wanting to read a book about personal finances, although it touches upon that briefly, but it doesn't really dive into that. It's more on the business aspect. But still, you can get so much from this book, and it really opened my eyes into, again, the reality of financial. The second book that I recommend on financial is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's spelled Housel. This is a compilation of short stories from different people, how they handle their finances. So you can take so much from these stories and learn from them. It shows the flaws, the biases, the patterns of handling money. But this book actually, if the previous one focused more on the business aspect of financials, this one is more on the psychology, understanding why people spend. But they're both very good reads, and I really recommend them. The next subject is habits. I've only read a few, but I do remember reading Atomic Habits. Actually, I didn't read that. I listened to it. It's an audiobook. Atomic Habits by James Clear. Yes, that one summarizes all of the books about habits, and it's a well-loved book for a reason. It talks about how to break your bad habits. Yeah, it mainly just talked about the importance of having habits. Being a creature of habit myself, this book is for me. It's written for me. If you're not a creature of habit, I don't know if this book is for you. It'll just be a red flag to you. A comparable version of that is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. They're similar, but there are some differences. So if you're gonna pick a book about habits, pick either of the two. The next topic is philosophy. I am slowly getting interested in philosophy. I've been reading a lot of philosophy books these days, but I'm taking it really, really slow because one, they're difficult to read, and second, philosophy is very broad. I don't really know where to start, so I'm starting from where I'm most comfortable, an aspect of philosophy that I already agree with, so it's easier for me to read and digest. I've been reading a lot of Nietzsche books, so I really like Nietzsche, Stoicism. So these two books that I'm going to recommend are from those umbrellas. I have Lucius Seneca's Letters from a Stoic. If you're into Stoicism, this is a good book to read. It's like a journal entry book. You get chapters unrelated to each other. It's like getting advice from an older brother or an older uncle. If you're starting to get into Nietzsche, before reading his other books that I'm currently reading right now, I recommend reading Penguin Little Black Classics. They're small. It gives like a concise idea of what the philosopher's ideology is about. This one, before reading any of his like heavier text, I really recommend this. This is Aphorisms of Love and Hate by Friedrich Nietzsche. Next is psychology books. I have a lot on psychology because apparently I like reading a lot about psychology books. Also because I don't really know how to categorize these books, so I'm just like lumping it into one. So bear with me. The first book that I'm going to talk about, Robert Greene's Art of Seduction. The title is a bit worrisome, but don't worry, it doesn't really do any damage unless you let it. It talks about different categories of people who has strengths which can be used to seduce people. When I say seduce, it doesn't mean romantic between two people who are in love. No, it's not about that. Seduction is all about seducing the other person or getting this person's attention. And by gaining this person's attention, you get to basically get him to do what you want. So it could be used in business, it could be used in different situations, and it can also be used in romance if you want. So again, take it with a grain of salt. The next book that I am going to recommend, I'm not sure if I recommend this completely, but there is a takeaway from this book that's made this book worth reading, I guess. It's called You Can Negotiate Anything by Herb Cohen. This is sales. It teaches you how to basically sell things. It introduced me to the idea that you don't have to be the smarter one to win. You don't, when I say that, sometimes you have to pretend like you don't know anything because then you get help. In contrast to being boastful about what you know, you not only annoy the other person, but they also don't help you. The next book is one of my favorites ever. It's called Mind Games by Powell. It mixes psychology with like science, although psychology is still science, right? Like natural science and cognitive science. I don't really know the big terms, but if you want to know the science part of psychology or how your mind works, this is a very interesting read. The next book that I'm going to talk about, I lost the jacket. It's called The Definitive Book of Body Language by Allan and Barbara Pease. This actually dove deeper on the ideas initially presented on this one because this also talked about body language. But if you want to get to know more about that aspect, this is a really good book to read. My dog did that. Like what it says on the title, it's about body language, how you can read people's minds without them talking by paying attention to how they move, their mannerisms, their initial responses or initial reactions. Yeah, it's very interesting to read, especially if you like watching people like me. Not in a bad way, not like in a serial killer type of way, but like just watching people walk by and coming up with stories of just their overall demeanor, making a story out of that. That's actually how I pick characters from books that I write. So I find people really interesting in general. So the next thing here, it's called How to Get Along with Difficult People by William Diehm. I like this because it talks about not just in a professional setting, but it talks about a family setting, like how to deal with your father or your mother or your uncle or auntie who are annoying, how not to avoid them, but to deal with them, how to understand them. The next book that I recommend is this one. It's called How to Win Any Argument by Robert Mayer. This is a little difficult to read. At first, I didn't like how it was presented, the ideas, but like what it says from the title, this one introduces you to just the concept of winning an argument, practicing silence, observation, getting to understand your tics, what pisses you off, and getting around that, controlling that instead of letting it control you. The next thing is this book. It's called The Globalization of the American Psyche, Crazy Like Us by Ethan Waters. This is about mental health. What I know about mental health and how wrong it is, and how mental illness is affected by culture, and it's very more local than you think. It's not actually what it's usually portrayed by American or Western studies and Western research. The next subject that I want to talk about is writing. There is this book I read back in high school. I already lost a copy, but it's called Robert's Rules of Writing by Robert Masello. This I remember applying directly while I was writing a book. A takeaway from this was the line, write what you enjoy reading. That's it. And then another book about writing is this one, Pep Talks for Writers by Grant Faulkner. I read this during the pandemic. It's a good book to read, also very pretty. It's just having a chat with co-writers. Okay, so then the last book that I want to talk about, I want to end on this. I would categorize this as general facts. It's called The Intelligent Conversationalist by Imogen Lloyd Webber. This is a cheat sheet. You can get pretty much everything that you need to know about every single subject in this world in this book, from a brief history of Asia, of proper use of grammar, the Constitution, a brief summary of feminism. But the thing is with this book, be wary, because it's just a summarized version. It's like a crash course on certain subjects, but these should not be used as a primary source. It's still advisable to conduct your own research on certain subject and not depend on this. But if you just want like a brief story or a brief lesson on each subject that matters, this is a very interesting book to read. So that concludes my nonfiction recommendations. I really want to talk about the books as much as I can, but I named a lot of books in this video, so we don't have that much time.